the Jack Alexander article about AA. The article that marked a milestone in the history of AA. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Copyright by the AA Grapevine Incorporated, reprinted with permission. Reprinted by special permission of the Saturday Evening Post, copyright 1941, the Curtis Publishing Company. Note: publication of Alcoholics Anonymous by Jack Alexander in the Saturday Evening Post issue of March 1st, 1941, marked a milestone in the history of this fellowship. Although one national article has been published previously, the Post report on the handful of men and women who had achieved sobriety through AA was largely responsible for the surge of interest that established the society on a national and international basis. The Post story is a reminder of AA's development in a relatively short span of years. In 1941, approximately 2,000 men and women were living the AA program successfully. Today, the number exceeds 1 million, and about 63,000 groups meet regularly throughout the United States and Canada and in 112 other countries. In 1941, Jack Alexander reported upon the sense of humility and service that distinguished the AA program and those who then practiced it. Alcoholics Anonymous has had a tremendous growth since that time, but the same awareness of our need to continue to serve fellow alcoholics in a spirit of helpfulness and humility remains a cornerstone of our society. It is in that spirit that this historic article is reprinted for all those members, old and new, who share a common interest in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous. Readers are reminded that this article was first published in March 1941, when AA had been in existence less than 6 years. References to dates, time sequences, and the number of members in various groups should be read with that fact in mind. On pages 10 and 11, the early help by John D. Rockefeller Jr. is described. This help, though modest, was important to AA in those early struggling days. Perhaps even more important was John D.'s conclusion that AA should pay its own way, a conclusion that led to the fellowship's unique and vital tradition of self-support. Today, AA's world services are wholly supported by contributions from AA groups and individuals and from the sale of books and pamphlets. The General Service Office is now in larger quarters. It employs both AAs and non-alcoholics equally dedicated. The Alcoholic Foundation has become the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, with 21 trustees, of whom 7 are non-alcoholics. The simple structure that proved so important to AA's growth is much the same as Jack Alexander found it in 1941. Alcoholics Anonymous by Jack Alexander. 3 men sat around the bed of an alcoholic patient in the psychopathic ward of Philadelphia General Hospital one afternoon a few weeks ago. The man in the bed, who was a complete stranger to them, had the drawn and slightly stupid look that inebriates get while being defogged after a bender. The only thing that was noteworthy about the callers, except for the obvious contrast between their well-groomed appearances and that of the patient, was the fact that each had been through the defogging process many times himself. They were members of Alcoholics Anonymous. a band of ex-problem drinkers who made an avocation of helping other alcoholics to beat the liquor habit. The man in the bed was a mechanic. His visitors had been educated at Princeton, Yale, and Pennsylvania, and were, by occupation, a salesman, a lawyer, and a publicity man. Less than a year before, one had been in shackles in the same ward. One of his companions had been what is known among alcoholics as a sanitarium commuter. He'd moved from place to place, bedeviling the staffs of the country's leading institutions for the treatment of alcoholics. The other had spent 20 years of life, all outside institution walls, making life miserable for himself and his family and his employers, as well as sundry well-meaning relatives who had had the temerity to intervene. The air of the ward was thick with the aroma of formaldehyde, an unpleasant cocktail smelling like a mixture of alcohol and ether, which hospitals sometimes use to taper off the paralyzed drinker and soothe his squirming nerves. The visitors seemed oblivious of this and of the depressing atmosphere that clings to even the nicest of psychopathic wards. They smoked and talked with the patient for 20 minutes or so, then left their personal cards and departed. If the man in the bed felt that he would like to see one of them again, they told him, he had only to put in a telephone call. They made it plain that if he actually wanted to stop drinking, they would leave their work or get up in the middle of the night to hurry to where he was. If he did not choose to call, that would be the end of it. The members of Alcoholics Anonymous do not pursue or coddle a malingering prospect, and they know the strange tricks of the alcoholic, as a reformed swindler knows the art of bamboozling. Herein lies much of the unique strength of a movement which, in the past 6 years, has brought recovery to around 2,000 men and women, a large percentage of whom had been considered medically hopeless. Doctors and clergymen, working separately or together, have always managed to salvage a few cases. In isolated instances, drinkers have found their own methods of quitting, but the inroads into alcoholism have been negligible, and it remains one of the great unsolved public health enigmas. By nature touchy and suspicious, the alcoholic likes to be left alone to work out his puzzle, and he has a convenient way of ignoring the tragedy which he inflicts meanwhile upon those who are close to him. He holds desperately to a conviction that, although he has not been able to handle alcohol in the past, he will ultimately succeed in becoming a controlled drinker. One of medicine's queerest animals, he is, as often as not, an acutely intelligent person. He fences with professional men and relatives who attempt to aid him, and he gets a perverse satisfaction out of tripping them up in argument. There is no specious excuse for drinking which the troubleshooters of Alcoholics Anonymous have not heard or used themselves. When one of their prospects hands them a rationalization for getting soused, they match it with half a dozen out of their own experiences. This upsets him a little, and he gets defensive. He looks at their neat clothing and smoothly shaved faces and charges them with being goody-goodies who don't know what it is to struggle with drink. They reply by relating their own stories, the double scotches and brandies before breakfast, the vague feeling of discomfort which precedes a drinking bout, the awakening from a spree without being able to account for the actions of several days, and the haunting fear that possibly they had run down someone with their automobiles. They tell of the 8-ounce bottles of gin hidden behind pictures and in caches from cellar to attic, of spending whole days in motion picture houses to stave off the temptation to drink, of sneaking out of the office for quickies during the day. They talk of losing jobs and stealing money from their wives' purses, of putting pepper into whiskey to give it a tang, of tippling on bitters and sedative tablets or on mouthwash or hair tonic, of getting into the habit of camping outside the neighborhood tavern 10 minutes before opening time. They describe a hand so jittery that it could not lift a pony to the lips without spilling the contents. Drinking liquor from a beer stein because it can be steadied with 2 hands, although at the risk of chipping a front tooth. tying an end of a towel about a glass, looping the towel around the back of the neck, and drawing the free end with the other hand, pulley fashion, to advance the glass to the mouth. Hands so shaky, they feel as if they were about to snap off and fly into space. Sitting on hands for hours to keep them from doing this. These and other bits of drinking lore usually manage to convince the alcoholic that he's talking to blood brothers. A bridge of confidence is thereby erected, spanning a gap which has baffled the physician, the minister, the priest, or the hapless relatives. Over this connection, the troubleshooters convey, bit by bit, the details of a program for living which has worked for them and which they feel can work for any other alcoholic. They concede as out of their orbit only those who are psychotic or who are already suffering from the physical impairment known as wet brain. At the same time, they see to it that the prospect gets whatever medical attention is needed. Many doctors and staffs of institutions throughout the country now suggest Alcoholics Anonymous to their drinking patients. In some towns, the courts and probation officers cooperate with the local group. In a few city psychopathic divisions, the workers of Alcoholics Anonymous are accorded the same visiting privileges as staff members. Philadelphia General is one of these. Dr. John F. Stauffer, the chief psychiatrist, says, "The alcoholics we get here are mostly those who cannot afford private treatment, and this is by far the greatest thing we have ever been able to offer them. Even among those who occasionally land back in here again, we observe a profound change in personality. You would hardly recognize them." The Illinois Medical Journal, in an editorial last December, went further than Dr. Stauffer in stating, "It is indeed a miracle when a person who for years has been more or less constantly under the influence of alcohol and in whom his friends have lost all confidence will sit up all night with a drunk and at stated intervals administer a small amount of liquor in accordance with a doctor's order without taking a drop himself." This is a reference to a common aspect of the Arabian Nights adventures to which Alcoholics Anonymous workers dedicate themselves. Often it involves sitting up as well as up with the intoxicated person, as the impulse to jump out a window seems to be an attractive one to many alcoholics when in their cups. Only an alcoholic can squat on another alcoholic's chest for hours with a proper combination of discipline and sympathy. During a recent trip around the East and Middle West, I met and talked with scores of AAs, as they call themselves, and found them to be unusually calm, tolerant people. Somehow they seemed better integrated than an average group of non-alcoholic individuals. Their transformation from cop fighters, canned heat drinkers, and in some instances wife-beaters was startling. On one of the most influential newspapers in the country, I found that the city editor, the assistant city editor, and a nationally known reporter were AAs and strong in the confidence of their publisher. In another city, I heard a judge parole a drunken driver to an AA member. The latter, during his drinking days, had smashed several cars and had had his own operator's license suspended. The judge knew him and was glad to trust him. A brilliant executive of an advertising firm disclosed that 2 years ago he had been panhandling and sleeping in a doorway under an elevated structure. He had a favorite doorway which he shared with other vagrants, and every few weeks he goes back and pays them a visit just to assure himself he isn't dreaming. In Akron, as in other manufacturing centers, the groups include a heavy element of manual workers. In the Cleveland Athletic Club, I had luncheon with 5 lawyers, an accountant, an engineer, 3 salesmen, an insurance man, a buyer, a bartender, a chain store manager, a manager of an independent store, and a manufacturer's representative. They were members of a central committee which coordinates the work of 9 neighborhood groups. Cleveland, with more than 450 members, is the biggest of the AA centers. The next largest are located in Chicago, Akron, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Washington, and New York. All told, there are groups in about 50 cities and towns. In discussing their work, the AA spoke of their drunk rescuing as insurance for themselves. Experience within the group has shown, they said, that once a recovered drinker slows up in this work, he's likely to go back to drinking himself. There is, they agreed, no such thing as an ex-alcoholic. If one is an alcoholic, that is, a person who is unable to drink normally, one remains an alcoholic until he dies, just as a diabetic remains a diabetic. The best he can hope for is to become an arrested case, with drunk saving as his insulin. At least the AAs say so, and medical opinion tends to support them. All but a few said that they had lost all desire for alcohol. Most serve liquor in their homes when friends drop in, and they still go to bars with companions who drink. The AAs tipple on soft drinks and coffee. Once a sales manager acts as bartender at his company's annual jamboree in Atlantic City and spends his nights tucking the celebrators into their beds. Only a few of those who recover fail to lose the feeling that at any minute they may thoughtlessly take one drink and skyrocket off on a disastrous binge. An AA who is a clerk in an eastern city hasn't had a snifter in 3.5 years, but says that he still has to walk fast past saloons to circumvent the old impulse. But he is an exception. The only hangovers from the wild days that plagues the AA is a recurrent nightmare. In the dream, he finds himself off on a rousing whooper-dooper, frantically trying to conceal his condition from the community. Even this symptom disappears shortly in most cases. Surprisingly, the rate of employment among these people who formerly drank themselves out of job after job is said to be around 90%. 100% effectiveness with non-psychotic drinkers who sincerely want to quit is claimed by the workers of Alcoholics Anonymous. The program will not work, they add, with those who only want to quit, or who want to quit because they're afraid of losing their families or their jobs. The effective desire, they state, must be based upon enlightened self-interest. The applicant must want to get away from liquor, to head off incarceration or premature death. He must be fed up with the stark social loneliness which engulfs the uncontrolled drinker, and he must want to put some order into his bungled life. As it is impossible to disqualify all borderline applicants, the working percentage of recovery falls below the 100% mark. According to AA estimation, 50% of the alcoholics taken in hand recover almost immediately. 25% get well after suffering a relapse or two, and the rest remain doubtful. This rate of success is exceptionally high. Statistics on traditional medical and religious cures are lacking, but it has been informally estimated that they are no more than 2 or 3% effective on run-of-the-mind cases. Although it is too early to state that Alcoholics Anonymous is the definitive answer to alcoholism, its brief record is impressive, and it is receiving hopeful support. John D. Rockefeller, Jr. helped defray the expense of getting it started, and has gone out of his way to get other prominent men interested. Rockefeller's gift was a small one, in deference to the insistence of the originators that the movement be kept on a voluntary, non-paid basis. There are no salaried organizers, no dues, no officers, and no central control. Locally, the rents of assembly halls are met by passing the hat at meetings. In small communities, no collections are taken, as the gatherings are held in private homes. A small office in downtown New York acts merely as a clearinghouse for information. There is no name on the door, and mail is received anonymously through a post office box. The only income, which is money received from the sale of a book describing the work, is handled by the Alcoholic Foundation, a board composed of 3 alcoholics and 4 non-alcoholics. In Chicago, 25 doctors work hand-in-hand with Alcoholics Anonymous, contributing their services and referring their own alcoholic patients to the group, which now numbers around 200. The same cooperation exists in Cleveland and to a lesser degree in other centers. A physician, Dr. W.D. Silkworth of New York City, gave the movement its first encouragement. However, many doctors remain skeptical. Dr. Foster Kennedy, an eminent New York neurologist, probably had these in mind when he stated at a meeting a year ago, The aim of those concerned in this effort against alcoholism is high. Their success has been considerable, and I believe medical men of goodwill should aid. The active help of two medical men of goodwill, Doctors A. Wisa Hammer and C. Dudley Saul, has assisted greatly in making the Philadelphia unit one of the more effective of the younger groups. The movement there had its beginning in an offhand way in February 1940, when a businessman who was a AA convert was transferred to Philadelphia from New York. Fearful of backsliding for lack of rescue work, the newcomer rounded up 3 local barflies and started to work on them. He got them dry, and the quartet began ferreting out other cases. By last December 15th, 99 alcoholics had joined up. Of these, 86 were now total abstainers, 39 from 1 to 3 months, 17 from 3 to 6 months, and 25 from 6 to 10 months. 5 who had joined the unit after having belonged in other cities had been non-drinkers from 1 to 3 years. At the other end of the time scale, Akron, which cradled the movement, holds the intramural record for sustained abstinence. According to a recent checkup, 2 members have been riding the AA wagon for 5.5 years, 1 for 5 years, 3 for 4.5 years, 1 for the same period with 1 skid, 3 for 3.5 years, 7 for 3 years, 3 for 3 years with 1 skid each, 1 for 2.5 years, and 13 for 2 years. Previously, most of the Akronites and Philadelphians had been unable to stay away from liquor for longer than a few weeks. In the Middle West, the work has been almost exclusively among persons who have not arrived at the institutional stage. The New York group, which has a similar nucleus, makes a sideline specialty of committed cases and has achieved striking results. In the summer of 1939, the group began working on the alcoholics confined in Rockland State Hospital in Orangeburg, a vast mental sanitarium which gets the hopeless alcoholic backwash of the big population centers. With the encouragement of Dr. R.E. Blaisdell, the medical superintendent, a unit was formed within the walls and meetings were held in the recreation hall. New York AAs went to Orangeburg to give talks, and on Sunday evenings the patients were brought in state-owned buses to a clubhouse which the Manhattan group rents on the west side. Last July 1st, 11 months later, records kept at the hospital showed that of 54 patients released to Alcoholics Anonymous, 17 had had no relapse, and 14 others had had only 1. Of the rest, 9 had gone back to drinking in their home communities, 12 had returned to the hospital, and 2 had not been traced. Dr. Blaisdell has written favorably about the work to the State Department of Mental Hygiene, and he praised it officially in his last annual report. Even better results were obtained in 2 public institutions in New Jersey, Greystone Park and Overbrook, which attract patients of better economic and social background than Rockland because of their nearness to prosperous suburban villages. Of 7 patients released from the Greystone Park institution in 2 years, 5 have abstained for periods of 1 to 2 years, according to AA records. 8 of 10 released from Overbrook have abstained for about the same length of time. The others have had from 1 to several relapses. Why some people become alcoholics is a question on which authorities disagree. Few think that anyone is born an alcoholic. One may be born, they say, with a hereditary predisposition to alcoholism, just as one may be born with a vulnerability to tuberculosis. The rest seems to depend upon environment and experience, although one theory has it that some people are allergic to alcohol, as hay fever sufferers are to pollens. Only one note is found to be common to all alcoholics: emotional immaturity. Closely related to this is an observation that an unusually large number of alcoholics start out in life as an only child, as a younger child, as the only boy in a family of girls, or the only girl in a family of boys. Many have records of childhood precocity and were what are known as spoiled children. Frequently, the situation is complicated by an off-center home atmosphere in which one parent is unduly cruel, the other overindulgent. Any combination of these factors, plus a divorce or two, tends to produce neurotic children who are poorly equipped emotionally to face the ordinary realities of adult life. In seeking escapes, one may immerse himself in his business, working 12 to 15 hours a day, or in sports, or in some artistic sideline. Another finds what he thinks is a pleasant escape in drink. It bolsters his opinion of himself and temporarily wipes away any feeling of social inferiority which he may have. Light drinking leads to heavy drinking. Friends and family are alienated and employers become disgusted. The drinker smolders with resentment and wallows in self-pity. He indulges in childish rationalizations to justify his drinking. He has been working hard and he deserves to relax. His throat hurts from an old tonsillectomy and a drink would ease the pain. He has a headache. His wife does not understand him. His nerves are jumpy. Everybody's against him. And so on and on. He unconsciously becomes a chronic excuse maker for himself. All the time he's drinking, he tells himself and those who butt into his affairs that he can really become a controlled drinker if he wants to. To demonstrate his strength of will, he goes for weeks without taking a drop. He makes a point of calling at his favorite bar at a certain time each day and ostentatiously sipping milk or a carbonated beverage, not realizing that he is indulging in juvenile exhibitionism. Falsely encouraged, he shifts to a routine of 1 beer a day, and that is the beginning of the end once more. Beer leads inevitably to more beer and then to hard liquor. Hard liquor leads to another first-rate bender. Oddly, the trigger which sets off the explosion is as apt to be a stroke of business success as it is to be a run of bad luck. An alcoholic can stand neither prosperity nor adversity. The victim is puzzled on coming out of the alcoholic fog. Without his being aware of any change, a habit has gradually become an obsession. After a while, he no longer needs his rationalizations to justify the fatal first drink. All he knows is that he feels swamped by uneasiness or elation, and before he realizes what is happening, he's standing at a bar with an empty whiskey pony in front of him and a stimulating sensation in his throat. By some peculiar quirk of his mind, he's been able to draw a curtain over the memory of the intense pain and remorse caused by preceding stem wonders. After many experiences of this kind, the alcoholic begins to realize that he does not understand himself. He wonders whether his power of will, though strong in other fields, isn't defenseless against alcohol. He may go on trying to defeat his obsession and wind up in a sanitarium. He may give up the fight as hopeless and try to kill himself, or he may seek outside help. If he applies to Alcoholics Anonymous, he's first brought around to admit that alcohol has him whipped and that his life has become unmanageable. Having achieved this state of intellectual humility, he's given a dose of religion in its broadest sense. He is asked to believe in a power that is greater than himself, or at least to keep an open mind on that subject while he goes on with the rest of the program. Any concept of the higher power is acceptable. A skeptic or agnostic may choose to think of his inner self, the miracle of growth, a tree, a man's wonderment at the physical universe, the structure of the atom, or mere mathematical infinity. Whatever form is visualized, the neophyte is taught that he must rely upon it and, in his own way, to pray to the power for strength. He next makes a sort of moral inventory of himself with the private aid of another person, one of his AA sponsors, a priest, a minister, a psychiatrist, or anyone else he fancies. If it gives him any relief, he may get up at a meeting and recite his misdeeds, but he's not required to do so. He restores what he may have stolen while intoxicated and arranges to pay off old debts and to make good on rubber checks. He makes amends to persons he has abused and, in general, cleans up his past as well as he is able to. It is not uncommon for his sponsors to lend him money to help out in the early stages. This catharsis is regarded as important because of the compulsion which a feeling of guilt exerts in the alcoholic obsession. As nothing tends to push an alcoholic toward the bottle more than personal resentments, the pupil also makes out a list of his grudges and resolves not to be stirred by them. At this point, he's ready to start working on other active alcoholics. By the process of extroversion, which the work entails, he's able to think less of his own troubles. The more drinkers he succeeds in swinging into Alcoholics Anonymous, the greater his responsibility to the group becomes. He can't get drunk now without injuring the people who have proved themselves his best friends. He's beginning to grow up emotionally and to quit being a leaner. If raised in an Orthodox church, he usually, but not always, becomes a regular communicant again. Simultaneously with the making over of the alcoholic goes the process of adjusting his family to his new way of living. The wife or husband of an alcoholic, and the children too, frequently become neurotics from being exposed to drinking excesses over a period of years. Re-education of the family is an essential part of a follow-up program which has been devised. Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a synthesis of old ideas rather than a new discovery, owes its existence to the collaboration of a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. Both alcoholics, they met for the first time a little less than 6 years ago. In 35 years of periodic drinking, Dr. Armstrong, to give the physician a fictitious name, had drunk himself out of most of his practice. Armstrong had tried everything, including the Oxford group, and had shown no improvement. On Mother's Day 1935, he staggered home in typical drunk fashion, lugging an expensive potted plant, which he placed in his wife's lap. Then he went upstairs and passed out. At that moment, nervously pacing the lobby of an Akron hotel was the broker from New York, whom we shall arbitrarily call Griffith. Griffith was in a jam. In an attempt to obtain control of a company and rebuild his financial fences, he had come out to Akron and engaged in a fight for proxies. He had lost the fight. His hotel bill was unpaid. He was almost flat broke. Griffith wanted a drink. During his career in Wall Street, Griffith had turned some sizable deals and had prospered, but through ill-timed drinking bouts had lost out on his main chances. 5 months before coming to Akron, he had gone on the water wagon through the ministrations of the Oxford group in New York. Fascinated by the problem of alcoholism, he had many times gone back as a visitor to a Central Park West detoxicating hospital where he had been a patient and talked to the inmates. He effected no recoveries, but found that by working on other alcoholics he could stave off his own craving. A stranger in Akron, Griffith knew no alcoholics with whom he could wrestle. A church directory which hung in the lobby opposite the bar gave him an idea. He telephoned one of the clergymen listed and through him got in touch with a member of the local Oxford group. This person was a friend of Dr. Armstrong's and was able to introduce the physician and the broker at dinner. In this manner, Dr. Armstrong became Griffith's first real disciple. He was a shaky one at first. After a few weeks of abstinence, he went east to a medical convention and came home in a liquid state. Griffith, who had stayed in Akron to iron out some legal tangles arising from the proxy battle, talked him back to sobriety. That was on June 10th, 1935. The nips the physician took from bottle proffered by Griffith on that day were the last drinks he ever took. Griffith's lawsuit dragged on, holding him over in Akron for 6 months. He moved his baggage to the Armstrong home, and together the pair struggled with other alcoholics. Before Griffith went back to New York, 2 more Akron converts had been obtained. Meanwhile, both Griffith and Dr. Armstrong had withdrawn from the Oxford group because they felt that its aggressive evangelism and some of its other methods were hindrances in working with alcoholics. They put their own techniques on a strict take-it-or-leave-it basis and kept it there. Progress was slow. After Griffith had returned east, Dr. Armstrong and his wife, a Wellesley graduate, converted their home into a free refuge for alcoholics and an experimental laboratory for the study of the guest's behavior. One of the guests, who, unknown to his hosts, was a manic depressive as well as an alcoholic, ran wild one night with a kitchen knife. He was overcome before he had stabbed anyone. After a year and a half, a total of 10 persons had responded to the program and were abstaining. What was left of the family savings had gone into the work. The physician's new sobriety caused a revival in his practice, but not enough of one to carry the extra expense. The Armstrongs nevertheless carried on borrowed money. Griffith, who had a Spartan wife too, turned his Brooklyn home into a duplicate of the Akron menage. Mrs. Griffith, a member of an old Brooklyn family, took a job in a department store and in her spare time played nurse to inebriates. The Griffiths also borrowed, and Griffith managed to make odd bits of money around the brokerage houses. By the spring of 1939, the Armstrongs and the Griffiths had between them cozened about 100 alcoholics into sobriety. In a book which they published at the time, the recovered drinkers described the cure program and related their personal stories. The title was Alcoholics Anonymous. It was adopted as a name for the movement itself, which up to then had none. As the book got into circulation, the movement spread rapidly. Today, Dr. Armstrong is still struggling to patch up his practice. The going is hard. He is in debt because of his contributions to the movement and the time he devotes gratis to alcoholics. Being a pivotal man in the group, he's unable to turn down the requests for help which flood his office. Griffith is even deeper in the hole. For the past 2 years, he and his wife have had no home in the ordinary sense of the word. In a manner reminiscent of the primitive Christians, they have moved about, finding shelter in the homes of AA colleagues and sometimes wearing borrowed clothing. Having got something started, both the prime movers wanted to retire to the fringe of their movement and spend more time getting back on their feet financially. They feel that the way the thing is set up, it is virtually self-operating and self-multiplying. Because of the absence of figureheads and the fact that there is no formal body of belief to promote, they have no fears that Alcoholics Anonymous will degenerate into a cult. The self-starting nature of the movement is apparent from letters to the files of the New York office. Many persons have written in saying that they stopped drinking as soon as they read the book and made their homes meeting places for small local chapters. Even a fairly large unit in Little Rock got started in this way. An Akron civil engineer and his wife, in gratitude for his cure 4 years ago, have been steadily taking alcoholics into their home. Out of 35 such wards, 31 have recovered. 20 pilgrims from Cleveland caught the idea in Akron and returned home to start a group of their own. From Cleveland, by various means, the movement has spread to Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Los Angeles, Indianapolis, Atlanta, San Francisco, Evansville, and other cities. An alcoholic Cleveland newspaperman with a surgically collapsed lung moved to Houston for his health. He got a job on a Houston paper and, through a series of articles which he wrote for it, started an AA unit which now has 35 members. One Houston member has moved to Miami and is now laboring to snare some of the more eminent winter colony lushes. A Cleveland traveling salesman is responsible for starting small units in many different parts of the country. Fewer than half of the AA members have ever seen Griffith or Dr. Armstrong. To an outsider who is mystified, as most of us are, by the antics of problem-drinking friends, the results which have been achieved are amazing. This is especially true of the more virulent cases, a few of which are herewith sketched under names that are not their own. Sarah Martin was a product of the F. Scott Fitzgerald era. Born of wealthy parents in a western city, she went to Eastern boarding schools and finished in France. After making her debut, she married. Sarah spent her nights drinking and dancing until daylight. She was known as a girl who could carry a lot of liquor. Her husband had a weak stomach and she became disgusted with him. They were quickly divorced. After her father's fortune had been erased in 1929, Sarah got a job in New York and supported herself. In 1932, seeking adventure, she went to Paris to live and set up a business of her own, which was successful. She continued to drink heavily and stayed drunk longer than usual. After a spree in 1933, she was informed that she had tried to throw herself out a window. During another bout, she did jump or fall, she doesn't remember which, out of a first-floor window. She landed face first on the sidewalk and was laid up for 6 months of bone setting, dental work, and plastic surgery. In 1936, Sarah Martin decided that if she changed her environment by returning to the United States, she would be able to drink normally. This childish faith in geographical change is a classic delusion which all alcoholics get at one time or another. She was drunk all the way home on the boat. New York frightened her, and she drank to escape it. Her money ran out, and she borrowed from friends. When the friends cut her, she hung around Third Avenue bars, cadging drinks from strangers. Up to this point, she had diagnosed her trouble as a nervous breakdown. Not until she had committed herself to several sanitariums did she realize, through reading, that she was an alcoholic. On advice of a staff doctor, she got in touch with an Alcoholics Anonymous group. Today she has another good job and spends many of her nights sitting on hysterical women drinkers to prevent them from diving out of windows. In her late 30s, Sarah Martin is an attractively serene woman. The Paris surgeons bid handsomely by her. Watkins is a shipping clerk in a factory. Injured in an elevator mishap in 1927, he was furloughed with pay by a company which was thankful that he did not sue for damages. Having nothing to do during a long convalescence, Watkins loafed in speakeasies. Formerly a moderate drinker, he started to go on drunks lasting several months. His furniture went for debt, and his wife fled, taking their 3 children. In 11 years, Watkins was arrested 12 times and served 8 workhouse sentences. Once, in an attack of delirium tremens, he circulated a rumor among the prisoners that the county was poisoning the food in order to reduce the workhouse population and save expenses. A mess hall riot resulted. In another fit of DTs, during which he thought the man in the cell above was trying to pour hot lead on him, Watkins slashed his own wrists and throat with a razor blade. While recuperating in an outside hospital with 86 stitches, he swore never to drink again. He was drunk before the final bandages were removed. 2 years ago, a former drinking companion got him into Alcoholics Anonymous, and he hasn't touched liquor since. His wife and children have returned, and the home has new furniture. Back at work, Watkins has paid off the major part of $2,000 in debt and petty alcoholic thefts, and has his eye on a new automobile. At 22, Tracy, a precocious son of well-to-do parents, was credit manager for an investment banking firm whose name has become a symbol of the money-mad 20s. After the firm's collapse during the stock market crash, he went into advertising and worked up to a post which paid him $23,000 a year. On the day his son was born, Tracy was fired. Instead of appearing in Boston to close a big advertising contract, he'd gone on a spree and had wound up in Chicago, losing out on the contract. Always a heavy drinker, Tracy became a bum. He tippled on canned heat and hair tonic and begged from cops, who are always easy touches for amounts up to a dime. On one sleety night, Tracy sold his shoes to buy a drink, putting on a pair of rubbers he'd found in a doorway and stuffing them with paper to keep his feet warm. He started committing himself to sanitariums, more to get in out of the cold than anything else. In one institution, a physician got him interested in the AA program. As part of it, Tracy, a Catholic, made a general confession and returned to the church, which he had long since abandoned. He skidded back to alcohol a few times, but after a relapse in February 1939, Tracy took no more drinks. He has since then beat his way up again to $18,000 a year in advertising. Victor Hugo would have delighted in Brewster. a heavy-thewed adventurer who took life the hard way. Brewster was a lumberjack, cowhand, and wartime aviator. During the post-war era, he took up flask toting and was soon doing a cook's tour of the sanitariums. In one of them, after hearing about shock cures, he bribed the Negro attendant in the morgue with gifts of cigarettes to permit him to drop in each afternoon and meditate over a cadaver. The plan worked well until one day he came upon a dead man who, by a freak of facial contortion, wore what looked like a grin. Brewster met up with the AAs in December 1938, and after achieving abstinence, got a sales job which involved much walking. Meanwhile, he had got cataracts on both eyes. One was removed, giving him distance sight with the aid of thick lens spectacles. He used the other eye for close-up vision, keeping it dilated with an eye drop solution in order to avoid being run down in traffic. Then he developed a swollen or milk leg. With these disabilities, Brewster tramped the streets for 6 months before he caught up with his drawing account. Today, at 50, still hampered by his physical handicaps, he is making his calls and is earning around $400 a month. For the Brewsters, the Martins, the Watkinses, the Tracys, and the other reformed alcoholics, congenial company is now available wherever they happen to be. In the larger cities, AAs meet one another daily at lunch in favorite restaurants. The Cleveland group gives big parties on New Year's and other holidays at which gallons of coffee and soft drinks are consumed. Chicago holds open house on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, alternately on the north, west, and south side, so that no lonesome AA need revert to liquor over the weekend for lack of companionship. Some play cribbage or bridge, the winner of each hand contributing to a kitty for paying of entertainment expenses. The others listen to the radio, dance, eat, or just talk. All alcoholics, drunk or sober, like to gab. They are among the most society-loving people in the world, which may help to explain why they got to be alcoholics in the first place. This completes the Jack Alexander article about AA.